bonjour à tous. Est-ce qu'elle peut servir positivement? Alors,
It.
la première chose que je voulais vous dire, c'est que
First thing I wanted to tell you, and I'm sure we'll debate on this, but as far as I'm concerned, speculation has always been there, always been present, and will always be present. Why? Because a speculator is at the very heart of an existing unbalance that you find in the market. The protection of real economy, of the industrialists, the individuals, the requesting protection, which exceeds the offer to protect. The regulated system reaches its limits when a bank, because it needs to make money and on equity, is going to have to pay for mortgage. If you want to change hedging for Airbus industry between dollar and euro, they're going to have to limit the hedging coverage in its own, because this risk hazard calls for equity. So there's this unbalance between supply and demand that is there, and that's when the speculator steps in. So the speculator can be of use there, empirically so. The second point that I wish to share with you is that this speculator next has the possibility to act more or less virtuously. A few years ago, derivatives, which are young products, were of use to these speculators because it is one of the many links in this market. And these speculators would run risks using various financial instruments that were highly complex. At least that's what I think. Complex, opaque, and speculators were not controlled much. We talked about regulators, and Thierry talked about them, or hinted at them. So the second point is that, here again, what we have is something that needs to be taken into account, controlling these speculators. And this comes through trying to understand what they do, to try and control them, and why not to sanction whatever or penalize them for whatever they're doing. A speculator in markets is one thing, but we could also look at the different techniques that the speculator uses. Normally, in a nutshell, speculators use techniques that are in the end of distribution chains, bell-shaped curves and so forth. That's what he uses. Everything is fine as long as everything remains fine. And the speculator will use these ends of the bell-shaped curve that are more sensitive. And so to try and answer briefly your question, and I will debate about this later, I'd like to say that a speculator can be useful, providing, number one, which is a must, as far as I'm concerned, and Thierry just listed it, is privatization of profits and pooling of losses. I think that's not possible. A trader that never goes on holiday and just about brings the bank and the state on the verge of, on the cusp of explosion, well, that is unacceptable. More American speculator looking on a long-term basis, over 70 years old, and looks like he's doing things that are more interesting. He runs risks where the regulated system cannot, I would say. Warren Buffett, you all guessed. I find him useful. I find him even, well, a nice guy. Why not? And then next, Paul might not be in agreement with me. So next, control. That is the key. What is controlling? It means controlling the objects, the instruments that these speculators use. When securitization was launched in France a few years ago, Thierry was saying finance is a tool, and securitization was a nice tool, but then it was misused in various ways. Nobody understood how it was used. Nobody, investors, regulators, and the financing banks or the funding banks either. Except for a couple who understood this so well that they made a fortune. So that is the key, controlling the situation. These different instruments manipulated by speculators are highly complex, and I think that some things can be done. First thing I have in mind on the derivatives, which is implemented, is a clearing chamber on products that were never used. This clearing house allows us who buys, what leverage they use, and how. And you'll find that in the Euro zone and in the United States, for instance, for the dollar. So the speculator being private and exclusively private, I'd say the banking laws that exist right now avoid that a major bank launch into equity and all the customers, including states, need to be aware of all of this. And I'd like to finish positively by saying that some things are done. I don't always agree, but I know that when he says nothing has been done, if I understand right, he said the same plumbers changed the plumbing. Well, yes, things did things. And I see the changes. My career was in banking. Now I'm more into research and teaching. And I see the difference. When I look at French banks and a few European banks or American banks, I see the differences. And I think that things never move fast enough or strongly enough, but the limitation of payments, remuneration, whether we're talking about future profits or so forth, all that moves in the right direction. And then to close, why will we not be overrun by these speculators again? There's one essential thing happening right now. If all talents don't invest in the speculator careers, in other words, if not everybody moves into Goldman Sachs offices, Thierry said that, we have everything. We have machines, IT, software, everything. We can deal with this and we can cope. Paul Jorion, we just heard Jean-Michel Beacco, who for years was in banking and said that speculation can be used. What do you think? Could speculations be useful and serve positively? The answer, well, when in 2030 we start thinking back about what we said here, I hope you'll remember that during the second session, somebody will say that speculation has its positive uses for economy. Well, they won't think it's true, but it was true at the time. Let me wind back to 2008. On the 1st of January 2008, the price of an oil barrel was somewhere around $40. On the 1st of July, 6 months later, it was at $142.5. Anyway, the price was multiplied by threefold, supply and demand. The demand was such that the price was increased threefold. And so at the beginning of 2008, we are at the beginning of a world recession with a drop in the demand. Somebody said I can't pay that anymore. The Pentagon needs to have all sorts of supplies. And so the Americans met and told the speculators to come and explain what they were doing. And the speculators We're not pleased at all, not amused to be the victims, to be pointed at. They left the meeting, dropped their position, and the prices dropped drastically. So Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and others, what they do with customers is not only to speculate on oil, but on different levels where you find oil, cocoa, cotton, and so forth, on commodities. When the price was increasing during the first semester, it was not only oil products, it was also pesticides, herbicides, and so forth. We ended up with 3 times more to pay when we purchased gas or vegetables. And when the speculators withdrew from the market and the prices dropped, that's when things dropped. And the speculator doesn't even know what they're speculating on. They purchase from one financial company, they purchase a basket, and so at the second half of 2008, producers in some countries couldn't even cover the costs of what they were producing, coffee, cotton, cocoa. Something else happened at the beginning of the year when prices were increasing. People said that the increase in the price of oil was linked to the fact that we'd reached peak oil. And when the price of oil increases, it's more interesting for new companies to deal with sustainable development. And when prices dropped, all these companies just disappeared. And so this, you know how important it is to see that speculation is difficult to define. On top of it, as you just heard, it's always been there. And third, it's good for a market because it brings in cash flow. And so speculation has not always been authorized. In fact, it's been banned at certain points. François Ier, one of the kings of France, banned speculation, and it lasted until 1885. Is it difficult to define what speculation is? The law, the act that changed in 1885, it said that you cannot play around increasing or decreasing prices. And so if you have 2 parties betting and they don't agree on their bet and the results, they are not allowed to come to court. Courts felt that this was just not to be taken into account. It was their own problem if they started betting. So what is speculation? You tell me that I'm against derivative products. No. No. A derivative product can be used for hedging, to compensate an existing risk. Take a crop. It's going to rain or there's too much sun. You can cover yourself. And you can erase or just about erase an existing risk. But when you see 28% of the loans truly and 72% for a speculative economy, and when you find yourself in such a situation, it is such that you create artificial risks. 2 people betting, one with the other, saying, you win if the price increases, I lose if this price increases. These people create artificially a risk that is not there. You heard earlier that when there is an unsatisfied demand in terms of hedging. No, not at all. No, when there are negotiators on a market, somebody who delivers goods and others receive these goods, they're both present, so there's exactly the same number of people in one side or in the other. when somebody says speculators inject cash flow, they're everywhere on the market. Well, yeah, they are, just like anybody who have reasons to be there. A speculative price, everybody knows what that is. It is a notion that you don't find in the economy. This is how I'm going to define it. It's a price that is set somewhere where it shouldn't be. It's either too high or too low. And speculators inject cash flow on markets at levels that don't interest anyone in real economy. Paul, Jorion, what is your conclusion then? What would it be? What do we keep? So, what do we do with this speculation? You have to come back to the change of the law that prohibited speculation in 1887. Let's just implement that act. So, Jean-Michel, if we come back to 1885, what do we do? I'd like to pick up here this abrogation of the law. If everybody applies it, then I agree completely. Otherwise, it's purely naive. When right now you hear, if you set up a speculative fund, you put this in Luxembourg, don't pay VAT, and so forth, I think this hedge fund is ridiculous to set it up in France, and you can put it in Luxembourg. We even have a high-speed train to go there faster to Luxembourg, which is within the Eurozone. But then when you don't quantify correctly or erroneously, then you have, look, when you talk about 28% to true economy and 72 is financial, this is completely wrong. Forget one thing. You forget that banks fund states who have huge debts by social security, local activities. We have excellent examples here. And they are into real economy. So be careful when you put forward these figures. Don't think that it's 28. Yes, hallelujah. No. And 72 in the pits. Not at all. We can't see things like that. But otherwise, it's utopious or naive on your part. So be careful when you manipulate figures. I agree. But on the rest, 99% of what Paul said, I agree with. But on oil, not quite. He was talking about the future instrument, the future, which is different. He was talking about futures. And Paul, if I remember right, futures at +2 or +3 years. So I'm not quite sure your demonstration is exact. So, Jean-Michel, you think that the abrogation of speculation is naive? Paul, what do you think? Why don't you believe that the financial world could suddenly see the light? Well, I'll answer everything at one fell swoop. When Moses came down with the law, the tables, the stone tables, and the people said, reading this? No way. We need an international conference. We can't imagine somebody who does all of that. We need to do this all together at the same time. Yes, exactly. So I disagree is a nice way of saying something, but it means that's what it means when you say I disagree. No, I don't agree. Or rather, I disagree. We set up something called G20 with bringing together the ministers of finance, and I truly believe and so I believe that he had a way of saying he agreed by saying, well, if everybody agrees, then we all have to agree. No. I'll give you another example. The Islam or Muslim finance. It's an extraordinary example on paper. No speculation. It is written. And people apparently or supposedly comply. Well, let's go see a few Islamic funding examples. And it's not at all the case. So naive, I don't agree. No, I would rather look, quantify, and say, speculators that you're talking about, tomorrow we will have this using high tech to succeed. Before, everybody who had a talent ended up with Goldman Sachs. No, but if you didn't pay bonuses, everybody'd go and be a brain at Ferraris and would have nice cars. But now, people now would rather go and work with Google rather than Goldman Sachs. Why? A few talented persons even go to the European Central Bank, the Banque de France, the European Bank also. So I see hope, a ray of hope. Before there were no brains, no talents. Now we seem to be banking on brains a little more. But we can't go to Deutsche Bank or BNP. We'll go elsewhere. And so there were always people buying Ferraris. But when you have safe freeways, radars, and the police, that is not naive. So when you talk about traders, you were in the same position. You say the prices of oil are futures prices. You've been in market stock exchange rooms. Look at the trading rooms. And the man working on the spot price, he has his neighbor working on futures. Where's the future right now? What level? And the neighbor answers, and he says, okay, I'll set myself on that. Paul, I agree, except you've given one tiny structure, and it's like commodities. I agree with you. The G20 2 years ago had mentioned it in their menu on commodities, if I remember right. Nothing was done. So I agree. I acknowledge the fact that you mentioned where it hurts in my demonstration. Really, you hit the nail on the head, where it hurts. So thank you very much, Paul, Jorion, and Jean-Michel Beacco. Thank you for this lively debate on speculation.